Hello everyone, and in this set of video lab tutorials on MotionBuilder, we're going to be looking at using motion capture information from another source, and also some of the really cool and neat features for editing motion capture in MotionBuilder, being able to splice it up, combine different animations together using blend animations and so forth. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different features and workflows today in MotionBuilder, and also we're going to take a look at using motion capture from another source. So in this week's course module, I have a web page that has 4,000 motion capture files that were recorded at Carnegie Mellon many years ago. If you scroll down to the bottom here, there's a bunch of different directories that you can click through. There's a MotionBuilder friendly release, and then 2010 pre-release of the MotionBuilder BVH files. So either of these are fine, but like I said, there's over 4,000 different animations. None of them are labeled, so you kind of have to go through them to see what the different animations are. But there's a ton of resources that you could use here for doing different things, and we're going to take a look at using this type of animation today. So what I've done is I've created a lab folder that I've added to the MotionBuilder asset browser. So here you can see I've got the resources panel and the asset browser here. To add in your own custom folder, you right click and go to add favorite path, and then go to wherever that directory is on your computer, and it'll give you your assets so that you can be able to work through them in here. And we're going to create all of these different files today, but there are two different files that I have. They're both BVH files. And you might be familiar with BVH files from 3ds Max. In the 3D Modeling 3 course, I believe you use BVH files with the character biped to animate your characters. And it's a common format for working with motion capture. And it's actually a skeleton system, so it's a skeleton rig. So to import this, I've got a brand new file here. To import this in, all I have to do is drag it in, and it's going to ask you how you want to do the BVH import. So just go BVH import, and there it is. And the skeletons are really small. I'm just going to focus in on it here. In comparison to the default characters in MotionBuilder, they might be closer to relative scale to maybe something that you might model in Maya, but the scale really doesn't matter. What matters is the motion file. This particular one, since it's all one file, it has a T-pose. I believe all of them do have T-poses for you to characterize them with, which is another great feature of this. But the T-poses are posed based off of the person in the scene, and they're not 100% perfect. You can see that the joint rotations are a little bit skew. So sometimes it produces some fairly odd results, but nothing that we can't manage, work with, or fix. So I've got this hop file here. Character just hopping around inside of the scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to characterize this data so that we can use it within MotionBuilder and apply it to a character. So to characterize this, well, there's a couple of things that we could do. The joints are really big on this guy. So if the joint size is something that is bothering you on the skeleton, you can basically select all of the joints here. Or you can go to the navigator and open up the scene. And inside of the scene will be the BVH reference. And it's very similar to the FBX skeleton that you've been working with. And what you can do is you can select the branches by right-clicking and clicking on Select Branches. And if you go to Properties here in the Resources, go to the Properties tab in the Resources, you'll see that there is a scaling area. And there should be skeletal node settings. And in the skeletal node settings, there is a size. And what you can do here is click in, just left click and drag, and change the size of all of the joints here at once by selecting all of them, which is pretty great. You don't have to do this, but just for visual purposes if it's something that's bothering you. The other thing that's cool about these is they also have a reference node. You can see here there's a locator in the middle of the scene that also has a reference as well. This is really handy when you want to resize or scale the character, because everything is parented back to this reference node, and it's not an actual joint that's scaling based off of all the different parts of the character here. Alright, so we have the animation here. We want to create a skeleton. So in our human IK panel, we can go up here to where it says define and go to define skeleton, or you can go to define and then skeleton from here. Really doesn't matter. It's going to ask you, it's going to say valid skeleton is required. Do you want to define one? And just like what we've done with the FBX files, I can select all the branches and drag and drop them into the reference here, since I've got it based off of the reference. You can either drag it into the reference and hips. And since these are the Motion Builder friendly files, they've been all named with the proper naming conventions, so we can just click and drag them in. Only problem is you can see here we're getting some warning here in the validation status of the skeleton, and it's saying that the right arm doesn't seem to be parallel to the x-axis. Okay, and you can see it's slightly off by 90 degrees. And one of the problems with these files, and you know, you're going to come across this depending on where you get your motion capture data from. If we were to select the hips here and then select the branches from the hips inside of the navigator, and then use the 0 rotation like we use in the FBX files, it kind of puts it into this blade reference here, which isn't really, you know, what we're looking for. We really just were looking to change the rotation of the arms, right? So you can do that. You can absolutely do that. So I'm going to undo what I just did by zeroing out all of those, and all I have to do is drill down in the settings here to in the hierarchy here to where those arms are. So that would be under the lower back, spine. And you can see here we've got BVH neck and also BVH shoulder and right shoulder. So I'll just grab these two branches by pressing Shift and then select those branches, and you can see that it'll select all the branches inside of those. And if I want to zero those branches out for the arms, I can right click and go to 0 rotation, and it will zero them out. Nice. And you can see the only thing now is that there's some issues with the hands, but you know, the hands aren't really a huge issue because those joints specifically they're not all finger joints and so forth. I don't think they're all absolutely defined here. But anyway, this is enough to characterize the skeleton and get some favorable results from our motion capture data. I just was checking the clavicle and some of the other spine features here. Alright, so yeah, so we've got pretty much everything set up for the skeleton just fine. So now we can actually set up the character definition. So I've kind of lost my my character panel here. So if I go back to character, and under character here, I'm just going to rename him to hop data. There we go. And I'm going to double click this, and that will bring me back to the character definition that we were at before. I could have characterized this from here as well by simply locking this down, but I'm just going to do it from here since that's what we've been doing so far in class. So I'm going to click off the check for the characterize. It's going to ask me what type of character I want to use. I'm going to use biped, and it should be all set. So hop data is coming up here as the character, and now all we have to do is get a character to use it with. So I'm going to go to my asset browser again. And inside the tutorials pane, I'm going to use one of the pre-built MotionBuilder characters, but I would expect you to be using, you know, obviously your character from the assignment that you've been working with. So I'm going to start with Agor. Just going to drag and drop Agor into the scene, do an FBX merge with no animation. Oh, by the way, typically in your workflow, you might want to save this as a characterized skeleton. So if you go up to File, Save As, and you might want to save this as the characterized skeleton. I'm not going to do so for the purposes of this, but it might be good to have as a reference to come back to. And I'm going to show you some other ways that you can retarget data in another video for this week. So we'll come back to that. We'll come back full circle later. But I'm going to drag Agor in, FBX merge, no animation. You're going to get some weird kind of warning about his limits on the model. That's fine if you're using him, but if you're using your character, you might not encounter this problem. And you can see he's much larger than the motion capture data. And if I select Agor from the human IK panel here, I can then set up his source data to the hop data. And if I hit the play button, Here he goes. Hop, hop, hop. Alright, so we got him hopping around the scene. What we could do now is be able to bake this data down to Agor's skeleton and then potentially reutilize it in other animations later, or even use it with another character. So what I would do from here is I would take Agor and go up to the Human IK panel, and what we would do is we would either plot it to a control rig or to a skeleton. Now you plot it to a control rig when you want to edit the animation in post, meaning that you want to change his finger joint movement, you want to change his arm, the way his arms are being animated, whatever. Maybe you want his arms in the air when he's hopping rather than being by his side. You could use a control rig to be able to edit that. We did that last week. Plotting to the skeleton is what you're going to want to do if you're exporting this thing out to Maya or to Unity or to Unreal to use inside of your games, because the control rig isn't going to come through to those. Basically what's happening here is it'll plot it to the control rig and then retarget that animation or puppeteer the skeleton of that animation based off of the control rig. When you plot to the skeleton, it puts those animation rotations, translations all in those specific joints. And if you want, you can click on the 3 dots buttons to see the settings. I've got my rotation filter set to gimbal killer. You could do unroll as well. But I'll leave it at gimbal killer, 60 frames per second, plot on frame. I don't have multiple takes, so I'm not going to check off plot all takes. And I'll click on plot. So once that's plotted, you'll see that the source is set to none. So that means that he's not being driven by the motion capture data that we imported anymore. And that means that he's being animated now independently of any other data that's inside of the scene. So we could actually get rid of the skeleton data and the characterization of the hop data that we created earlier. So to get rid of that, I find the most efficient way to do that is to go to your scene and then select the BVH reference or whatever the animation reference is that you have in there. Right click and select the branches, and then right click the branches you have selected and then go to delete and then confirm. And it's going to ask you a few questions. It's going to say delete the selected items, one or more objects cannot be deleted, hit OK. It's going to say there's a constraint used by some objects, say yes to all. It's going to ask you if you want to keep the characterization of the hop data that we created, delete that as well, and yes to all for that. And what that should do is it should get rid of pretty much everything. So Agor should be the only character in the scene, Agor should be the only skeleton in the scene, which is exactly what we want when we want to import this or to be able to edit it in other data. So what I'll do from here is I'll save this as a plotted version. So I'm going to go to File and then Save As. And I already have a hop plotted that I created earlier, but I'm just going to overwrite that here. So I'm going to go to Save, so hop underscore plotted, or hop underscore plot might be what you want to save it as. So I'll say Save. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite, and I'll say yes. Okay, so now this plot has been overwritten. Okay, so that's how you can characterize some data from another source inside of MotionBuilder. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the same process again, but we're going to look at some data that isn't as clean. It's going to have some jitter on it, and we're going to look at some ways to clean it up.